Welcome to the Dawn Jarvis Show podcast, where we talk to busy leaders and professionals and business owners about who they are, what they do, and why they do it. We also talk about how they stay focused, positive, and productive, and how, as very busy people, they maintain their own health and well-being. Today's guest is my friend Deeann Graham, and we are going to talk about autoimmune hair loss. And we're going to learn about how community is one of the most important pieces when experiencing a diagnosis of alopecia, about what resources are available to help at this very difficult time, and to find out that everybody will have an opinion on what you should do, but to move forward, it's important to find the confidence and do things your own way. I met Deeann on a course, an online course, Heroic Online Courses, by Pat Flynn, and we went on to be members of a mastermind together. Deeann Graham is an award-winning author, alopecia coach, consultant, educator, and advocate. She was diagnosed with alopecia areata at 7 years old. She published Heads On, Stories of Alopecia, to share stories and photos of people around the world living with alopecia in order to provide a broad perspective on the journey of hair loss. Deeann is also the host of Alopecia Life podcast and a course creator where she continues to educate and share stories to help others realize they are not alone. Hello, Deeann. It's lovely to see you.
Hi, Dawn. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you to you for coming on. A really interesting topic. It's so good to see you, and I'm looking forward to our chat. The first question in your bio, I found out that you were diagnosed with alopecia at 7 years old, and we were talking before, and as a children's nurse who worked with people with hereditary disease, and having a son who was diagnosed with diabetes at 22, I realised that diagnosis and age, particularly with children and young people, can be quite difficult and different, I think, is what I wanted to get out. So I wanted to talk to you about both your diagnosis at age 7, but also how you got to where you are to do the work that you're doing with hair loss.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there, a lot, because when you're diagnosed as a child and you think, this is the way that things are. And so you look to your parents or other adults in your life for guidance. And, that could be from saying, this is how you handle this. This is how you present yourself to the world. And that is kind of where I was. And a lot of the time it was not talking about it. Back then, you didn't talk about your feelings or things that were going on. You just kind of moved through it, you powered through, and you dealt with it. And so that's how I did it. You can look at it as, being really strong and pushing through and persevering, but it was really challenging to not really have an understanding of what alopecia areata really was. And autoimmune disease never even entered the picture. The term autoimmunity never entered until I was way older, an older adult, in fact.
Okay, and that must have been, yeah. And when did you start feeling different? Was it as a teenager, was it as a young adult, or
actually I was a child who felt different for forever. I mean, when I was 2 years old is when I was first diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And that life, as you now know, right, is very challenging. Your son was 22. I was actually 2 years old when I was diagnosed. And so my life was, you're different already. You're getting insulin injections once a day at the time. It was like, that's all they would say. Okay, you just have this once a day and you have to manage your life around this one dose plus snacks. And then you would go to school and you'd be eating a snack during recess, and it would just be, how much more do you need to be told you're different when kids are playing on the playground and you're, hiding a snack in the pocket of your sweater. So yeah, I mean, it's just so feeling different wasn't an uncommon thing for me or an unknown thing to me. It was very familiar. And so the added diagnosis of alopecia areata and being bald was just kind of a topper.
Oh, And I can't imagine what that would be like, actually, to be going to school, to have, I'm guessing quite dramatic hair loss, and having to cope with that, as well as a long-term condition. How did you cope with it?
Well, I didn't. I mean, I think that coping
Yeah.
is something that is a common day term now,
Yeah.
but coping and then thriving, right? I mean, those are two
Yeah.
things that you didn't do. You just, I mean, I lived and I played sports. I had friends, I had a family,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
they were all really loving and wonderful. But I did extracurriculars. I was in Girl Scouts, and playing those sports really did bring me out of my shell, because a lot of the time it's tempting to isolate yourself at home, right? And just say, I don't want to see people. I don't want anyone to see me. And that was just a really big deal for me to go out and play sports. And so
Yeah.
I did that.
You raised an interesting point there around the word coping, and why would we expect a child to cope? What does coping mean? And I
Mm-hmm.
suppose as an adult, it's around managing, it's around finding a way to live, and I think with long-term conditions, I've experienced this with my son, and that you find a way of managing and knowing what you're capable of. But I think as a child, it's not fair. It's just that, and especially when you're seeing other people, and as you say, knowing that you're different, and so very challenging, I would have thought. And I like the fact that you played sports, and you didn't stay at home, but nobody would have blamed you if you had. If that would have been
Mm-hmm.
totally understandable. And have that, as well as hair loss, and sort of like going out and facing the world, and this is me, it is additionally commendable. But I'm sure that you don't want to be seen as brave or anything like that, because that's
Mm-hmm.
quite patronizing. But because that's your life, isn't it, really?
Totally.
And that is your life, and you've managed to channel sort of living this life with sort of like doing a lot of work around alopecia and hair loss. And I sort of wanted for our, and because I know that this affects quite a lot of people, and at different ages and different causes. You've talked about autoimmune as being a cause of hair loss, and I think sometimes people don't know what alopecia is, what it's caused by. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. So for people who might not know, hair loss, we can picture that, we can see what that means. But an alopecia, that's quite a technical term that people might not know what it means. So I wondered if you could help us with that.
You bet. So alopecia areata is considered an autoimmune condition, and a lot of people who live with alopecia prefer to call it a condition instead of a disease. And it's kind of softer, I guess, when you think about it.
Yeah.
You don't go, it's a disease. And even though our
Yeah.
bodies are really confused, it's not unlike any other autoimmune condition, right? I mean, type 1 diabetes is autoimmune.
Absolutely.
Lupus, Crohn's disease, all of these are our bodies being confused and attacking in this case, the hair follicles. And they are, for the most part, active still, and you can have spontaneous regrowth at any time in your life, even after the extreme of alopecia universalis. I've seen it before. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really good to know. And also good to know there's different types. It's not always irreversible, and there's different ways of coping with that. So you talk about community being very important when you experience that diagnosis, and I think community is really important anyway. And it's interesting around the world, because we talked about, is it condition, is it a disease? And I'm a nurse and come from a medical model, but you are right, when you're talking about any long-term condition, it's better to talk about it as a way of life rather than and the word disease makes it very medically modeled, doesn't it? And so does diagnosis as well. But I suppose there's something around having a diagnosis that makes you, it's a thing, and it's not something that it's a stress thing, or it's something else. So I think the word diagnosis is important. And as I said, you talk about community being really, really important. So tell me a little bit about how that's helped you and how that can help others.
Absolutely. If we could take like one step back, I should have
Sure.
added a little bit about the the term or the diagnosis of alopecia areata, because it is the
Yeah.
blanket term for all
Yeah.
forms of autoimmune hair loss. And so
Uh-huh.
alopecia areata is really, when you look at it, it talks about areata. So it's spots, round spots, typically. Sometimes you can have diffuse hair loss. But then it can progress to alopecia totalis, which is complete scalp loss. And you might keep your eyelashes, eyebrows, your nose hair, your hair. And then it may progress to alopecia universalis, which is what I have, and that's head to toe hair loss. And so when you hear alopecia areata, medically in the medical office, they will just call it alopecia areata, no matter if you look like me or you have patchy hair loss. So it's kind of common to just hear alopecia kind of thrown out like that. And there are different types of alopecia too. There's scarring alopecia and androgenic alopecia, but what I kind of focus on is autoimmune alopecia. And
Brilliant.
yeah, let's go back to that community question, the importance of it. And like you said, it's community is important for everything, right? I mean, when you find your people, when you know that there's someone who understands, it makes a world of difference. And for me personally, I did not meet anybody for like 30 years who had alopecia. I mean, nobody looked like me on television, nobody looked like me in my neighborhood. And I lived in a pretty busy part of Southern California. It was, houses were row houses, next door. And I lived in the suburbs and went to school in really populated cities. So not seeing anyone it's not because they didn't exist. The percentage, the 2% of the population has been consistent throughout time from the time I've had it till now. And those numbers are pretty significant. So the fact that people are covering it with a wig or a scarf, or they're having just spontaneous regrowth, right? They're getting one spot and it's growing back. So they no longer have like the visible signs of alopecia. That it kind of throws you off a little bit, especially as a child, thinking, wow, I truly am alone. And recognizing that now that I'm an adult is kind of, I remember feeling very sad about it as an adult, thinking,
Yeah.
wow, I wish I would have known, because it is very lonely feeling for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. And what types of communities are there? I mean, we're in this online world at the moment, but
Mm-hmm.
there are different types of communities, aren't there?
Mm-hmm.
I remember before Facebook existed, because I was around before Facebook existed, viewers and listeners,
Mm-hmm.
people used to have email groups. I was in email, like Yahoo groups, that, people did all sorts of different things, even if they couldn't be together in person. But obviously there's in person, and there's all different kinds of ways, isn't there? So tell us a bit about that, Deeann.
Yeah. And I think back then there was one nonprofit
Mhm.
organization that is still around, and that's the National Alopecia Areata Foundation, NAF. And that was around, but I didn't know about it until I was an adult. And they focus a lot on research, but they have camp, or they have, I guess, a conference every year.
Yeah.
And that is really a positive impact. That's where I first met folks who were living with hair loss. And
Yeah.
that made a huge difference for me. And I know that I mean, people say life changing when they go to these events. They go, oh my gosh, these people are here for me, my people.
Yeah.
And then the next thing, and one of the groups that I work with, and kind of it's really close to my heart, is the Children's Alopecia Project, and that's
Yes.
CAP. And they have camps every year. And I've actually, there's a camp almost every month. The next 11 months, there will be a camp once a month throughout the states. And those are incredible. If you've ever attended a camp where it's focused on the
Yes.
condition or disease, I mean,
Yes.
the difference that it can make,
Yeah.
and you see the light that shines
Yeah.
in their eyes, and you just go,
Mhm.
wow, this can make such
Yeah.
a difference. And it does. I mean, kids walk away feeling more confident, knowing that they're not alone, and they can then go back home and just kind of communicate that with their their classmates or their teammates or anything like that. And it really does take it's kind of a letdown. I remember thinking, after my first conference, I was like, yay, look at all these people. It's wonderful. And then you go home, right? And you think, oh my gosh, wow, what a total bummer, to be home with like normal people, quote unquote. And so it's like, you have to continue to communicate with people. And so I always recommend when people leave in-person conferences or camps to keep up communicating, reach out, have a phone call, have a Zoom call, try to meet people within your local community to get together with. And I know with COVID and things like that, I think that's been more challenging, but the importance of it is just so crucial.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think you can have the high of being away, being with your people, and then if you, and I think the challenges, and this is a little bit, I talk about networking sometimes, in that the challenges is how you're going to use that, the people you've met to sort of like support you going forward. I really like the idea of a conference. I also really like the idea of charities that are available. And I've had asked people with different conditions, or do you know of any charities or non-profits that sort of work with that particular thing, and it does depend what you want to get out of it and what that charity does, but they are there with a bit of research and signposting. You can get there. I used to go away on a holiday vacation with children with cystic fibrosis, and you're absolutely right. It is life-changing and quite humbling to do that. So to see those children together and doing, we used to go abseiling. I didn't do any abseiling because I was too scared, but they do a bit of canoeing, abseiling, or whatever together to do those things that they might not have had the courage to do in their normal situation. So that's lovely. And so you also talk about the resources that are available to help. I know that you've designed some of those resources as well. So, what are resources that are available to help? So, we have the internet, which is, vast and stuff like that. But I think with community and like-minded people, it might be easier to find those resources and for them to be more useful.
Yes. And I think the big thing are books. And children, when the thing that I found when I went to this first conference was I knew I wanted to write a book and talk about it, but I knew that my story was just a tiny piece of it, right? And I started to meet all of these amazing people, and I thought, well, why not tell their stories? Why not help them share their stories to give that broader perspective on hair loss throughout the world and see the varying degrees, varying responses to it. And so it was really important for me to have photos and stories, because growing up, I never, ever saw anybody who had alopecia. And anytime you saw someone who was bald was, they were a villain on TV, and they were men for the most part. And, as I got older, the reference when people would say, oh, Britney Spears went, a little crazy and she shaved her head off. And so the reference of that is always kind of interesting and always makes us feel like a little bit frustrated by that. Or women who shave their head too, like Sinead O'Connor back in the day. That was the thing. It's like, well, it's different when you choose to shave your head versus having this, right? And so there were a couple of things like that. And I thought, if there's nothing out there for people who are recently being diagnosed, and this was, there was probably 24, 26 years between the time I had been diagnosed to the time that I wanted to put my book out. There had been nothing like this out there. And I thought, if I could benefit, I would have benefited from it. And so you kind of selfishly do something that would help yourself back then. Absolutely. That you realize, so helping others, I didn't actually realize how big a project it would become and what it would be. And I want to just say to all the story contributors, I reached out to people, and there were very few people who said no, or that they weren't ready, or they didn't know how to share. But I had photographers who donated their experience and just said, yes, I want to be part of this project. And so I was able to do it on pennies. And, that's kind of unheard of. People always kind of want a return on what they're giving you. And I fully appreciated what they were giving. And I asked them and gave them photo credit and continued to update them on how the book's doing and the kind of response that I'm getting. So, and I just had such a phenomenal response from people.
What's your book called, Deeann?
It's called Head On, Stories of Alopecia.
And it's available on Amazon, isn't it? And we're going to put links to those to your book in the show notes. And you also talked to me about sort of the children's books that might have been useful when you were a child that you would recommend.
Yeah, and all of these books are available on Amazon, and books like Where's Your Hair, Hannah? My Hair Went on Vacation, Francie Puts on Her Courage, and What's Silly Hair Day with No Hair. Anything that features a child with alopecia, whether it's the focus of the book or whether it's kind of unrelated, like the Crazy Hair Day book with the Silly Hair Day, it just brings attention to something that maybe isn't thought about before, or it educates in a way where a parent can give the book to the classroom, kind of donate it and say, okay, let's have the kids just pick it off the shelf and look at it and get familiar with alopecia without actually having to talk about it. They can just look at pictures or read the story. And a lot of kids don't read, when they're young, and these kids are coming in for the first time into pre-K or kindergarten, they're just into looking at the pictures. So there's lots of educational resources from books that are helpful and that were never available to me growing up. And so I try to expand on that on my website. When I talk about resources, it's like, here's this, here's that, and just try to give everybody what they need.
Yeah, and I think that's amazing. So I love books. I'm surrounded by books. I love them. Sometimes I buy them and don't read them. Sometimes I love the just because I like the subject and want to learn about it. I love books with pictures in it because I think that's more expressive. I'm a very visual person, and I don't know if it's because I'm pre-internet, but I think the power of books to have a conversation about, so that's what I love about books. You can have a conversation about a book, even sort of like what the themes of the books are, or with adults, but children will just pick up a book and they will just enjoy it for its sake and will learn by osmosis around it. It's a real educational opportunity. Yes. So I love that. And the other resources, so you've got a website, and again we'll put the links to that, but you do a podcast, so there's much more out there. I know because a lot of Black women suffer from hair loss, and we wear a lot of wigs and stuff to cover the hair loss, but I know particularly around menopause time and things that there's a lot of hair loss, and so there's much more out there about it, much more community groups, much more things that podcasts that you do, and other things around it. So there is a lot of resources. And what would you recommend for someone who might be newly diagnosed, or this might be a new problem for them, that they should do? What resources should they access or look for?
Yes. And so even going on to Amazon and putting alopecia books is just a great way to get familiar with what's available out there. And then of course, come over to my website, and I try to have all sorts of resources there, right? Because I know that people learn in different ways, right? There's, like you said, reading is what appeals to you, and touching a book. But sometimes people want to just have a digital copy of that. And if you can listen, and that's better for you as a learning tool, then listen to podcasts, and also seek out these mentors who are living their lives wanting to mentor these young kids, saying, your experience doesn't have to be the way that mine was, if it was a negative one, or it can be just as good as mine was if it was a positive one. And I think that makes a world of difference. You've got these celebrities who are living with this, Anthony Kerrigan, and I don't know if you're familiar with who he is, but
no, tell me who he is.
So he is, he's an actor, and he's been on a lot of different movies, and he's played a villain. He was on Gotham, and just plays kind of these villainous type characters, and he loves it, but he's just played some more common guy type characters recently. And that's been really exciting for us in the alopecia community, because we don't always want to be seen as villains, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and he's kind of one of the most amazing people, and he's in my book too. So I'm always about talking about him, because he's just been so generous with his time with the kids and with me for the book. And he's been interviewed on the podcast. But also, when kids see people like them in the media. I mean, right now, Jada Pinkett Smith is getting a huge amount of press, right? Because she's living her life in the way that she wants to without talking about it necessarily, but just sharing and saying, this is the way I want to be. And so it's getting the press that it needs right now. And my wish was that it would be a little bit more informative about alopecia itself. But anytime anybody's talking about it, it draws attention, and it's a good thing because awareness is key. Education is so important. And the more people who can be educated, the less times that we'll be walking down the street and we'll be asked if we have cancer or not. They'll be going, oh, I wonder if they have alopecia. And I think that will be, the shift and the change that all of us are looking for, really.
Definitely. And that sort of leads me on to that, everybody, we've talked about this, everybody has an opinion with whatever is going on with you. Everyone has an opinion on it. If you've got a cold, like that, every day I think I've got COVID-19, literally every day. And and I haven't, thank goodness. But everyone's got an opinion about how you should live your life, how you should manage things. And I'm sure everyone's got an opinion about how you should manage hair loss, what you should do, what tonic you should take, what you should rub on your head, and stuff like that. But you say it's important to find the confidence to do it your own way, to find, I guess, to use the resources that are available to you, to use the community that's available to you, and find your own way. It's a bit like having a kid, isn't it, really? Everyone tells you what to do, don't you? But with your second one, you're like, oh yeah, no, this I'll do it my own way. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's important not to get confused, isn't it? And then, find your own way of being, of managing. Right. What do you think about that, Deeann?
Oh, I totally agree with that. That is, I even have on my website, it says Alopecia Life, and then it says doing alopecia your way. And it is the most important piece of this because everybody, like you said, has an opinion. They, want you to try this onion juice on your head or black seed oil or drink this kale smoothie or, this can be helped. My friend did this and this worked for her. Oh, there's so much right now going into things like studying the gut biome. And that's kind of a big deal right now with autoimmunity in general, not just alopecia. And so a lot of people, they do a gluten-free diet and they do a dairy-free diet and they find that their hair grows back, but that doesn't work for everybody else. I know some of the healthiest people in the world and they are still bald, right? There's a guy who's, I think his name's Cyrus, and he does the Mastering Diabetes, and he's a type 1 diabetic, extremely athletic, and he also has Hashimoto's, and he manages to keep his insulin levels to like a bare minimum, eating a plant-based diet, but he's still bald. He's healthy as all get out, but he still has alopecia universalis. So, it's kind of, I don't know. It would be nice if we could just go, okay, yes, there are all these things, but we can spend our entire life chasing something that works or doesn't work. And the time, of course, you don't want to ignore things that are going on internally, right? If you have a vitamin D deficiency, if you have an iron deficiency, those things can all be figured out and worked on for sure. But if you're going to be bald your entire life, the attention and time spent on building your confidence and working on ways to thrive in who you are is probably better well spent doing that.
I absolutely agree with you. I really do. And I think to have peace, you have to be confident in what you're doing, and you almost have to come to peace with it, don't you? That you're doing the best you can, and as long as you are doing the best you can, that's okay. And I think the confidence comes from being able to talk to, for want of a better expression, people who are saying you should be doing this, should be doing that, should be doing this, should be doing that, because they may have their own reasons for saying whatever they're saying to you. And it's sort of like it's all about being a whole person and living your life. So I wanted to quickly say to you about the word bold, because it's sort of it's quite a harsh word, I think, really. Do you own it or do you avoid it? How do you feel about that word?
It's nothing to me now, but I can't say that it always did represent kind of a nothingness for me, because I remember even like the word wig, because I wore a wig from the age, I guess I was maybe 7, 8. I started wearing a wig up until I was in 8th grade when my hair grew back. So, and then I wore it again as an adult. But if somebody said the word wig, I remember cringing and feeling like I would have to respond in some way to that word, even if it wasn't even talking about me, if it was just kind of thrown out, you know. And so the word wig was kind of a troublesome one for me. And bald represented the same thing to me. It was something like, oh, I don't want to talk about this. It is a harsh word, and it's kind of seen as a negative, right? I mean, bald is, let's avoid this at all costs, right? I mean, the beauty industry is like a $511 billion industry.
A lot.
Yeah. And it's really focused on avoiding that, or at least on our head, and taking care of hair everywhere else on our body by waxing or removing it somehow.
It's just, I was just, as you were talking, and I was just thinking about those words and sort of the, you know, what hair represents. It represents beauty, it represents youth, it represents, you know, and as you said, the hair care industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and the way things are advertised and who advertises them, you know, it's very interesting, isn't it, really, around these things. So and thank you for that. I ask everybody this question. We've talked about, you know, this is an autoimmune disorder. We talked about your type 1 diabetes. And so the 2 questions I always ask all my guests, because the focus of this podcast is around health and well-being, is how do you manage to your own health and well-being while all this is going on? And this is it's run through the whole of this podcast, how you do that and what you do about that. But also, how do you stay focused, positive and productive while you're doing that, because it's a lot, isn't it, you know, and it has been since you were a child. So you know, it'd be helpful, and some tips for the listeners about how you do that, how you manage everything.
So for me, the shift has come from talking about it, from never talking about it, no, not a word about it, hiding it, to talking about it when it's appropriate, and not just like going out with a bullhorn, you know, talking about it. And I think that has actually built my confidence. It builds my health. It makes my mindset better when I realize that I can help others. And that is one of the biggest things. I mean, I feel so excited to be able to help other people who are going through this, and helping them be in a position where I never could. And of course, you know, I walk my dog. I don't like exercise like a mad woman. I used to work out a whole bunch. And I write articles. I'm constantly working on building the resources for other people. I have my kids, my husband, and I mean, there's a lot that goes into just kind of managing your life as a person. And right now that's what it looks like for me.
Amazing. That is amazing, and very inspirational as well. You know, so how can people get in touch with you, hear more about you? I know and we did a course about doing courses together, so I know you're doing a course. You know, find out about your course, and I know we're going to put links in about your book. But how can people get in touch with you and hear more about you if they want to do that?
Yeah, you bet. And I can be reached on Instagram at Alopecia Life Coach. I'm on Facebook, and I know you'll have all of that in the links. And also I can be reached at alopecialife.com. I have a contact page there. I also have resources. You can purchase the book through there. And I'm happy to answer questions from anybody. I know a lot of my energy has been put into educating the medical community too. And I know a lot of your listeners are coming from the medical community, nurses, diverse nurses. And I have worked really hard to try to educate, because the limited amount of time, and that's when we talked about time earlier, that you have with your physician and your nurse is very tiny, right? I mean, I'm not sure about in the UK, but we get maybe 4 to 7 minutes, and that's if there's a scribe.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so it's just so quick, right? The appointment itself is 15 minutes, but that's taking vitals and things like that. And there's not a lot of area to educate at those appointments, but really that's where it starts, right? When we're talking about how do people find resources, they shouldn't ever be leaving a physician's appointment without some resources, without a nonprofit information, a link to a CAP page or to a resource page like mine, or a book title or a podcast. I mean, there are so many resources. And for me, that's kind of another piece of it, educating the medical community so that they can feel like they're empowering their patients when they leave, right? So that they go, oh, I've given them something, we're not just giving them a cream and having them come back in 60 days to see if it helped or not. So I think that's a big piece of it too.
Fantastic. I love that. I love that. We're coming to the end of the time, and it's been absolutely wonderful to talk about this, very health focused and holistically focused too. And I'm just going to ask if you've got one tip that you want to share with the audience that they can go away with, and to help them with anything actually, any long-term condition, because I think what you have said applies to a lot of long-term conditions as well.
Absolutely. I would say knowledge is power. And the more you educate yourself, the better you can be when you go into a physician's office or when you're talking to family and friends about what's going on with you and what you want from them, and figure out how to ask for what you want. And that can go a long way too.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Deeann. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on this show. So thank you very, very much. And that is it for the Dawn Jarvis show today. If you like what you've heard, please comment below. We really like to hear what you've got to say, and like, subscribe, share, and we will see you again soon. Take care.